What is up? In today's video, we're going to go through some examples for you to practice the preterite and the imperfect tenses in Spanish, because in Spanish, for some reason, they have two past tenses instead of just one, and that can complicate things. So the best way to really get a feel for the differences is to just do a bunch of examples and check your answer. So that's what we're going to do today. If you don't know the conjugations of the preterite and the imperfect, then please look them up so that you actually know how to conjugate verbs as we go through this video. So this isn't for you if you're completely new to it. I'm not going to explain from scratch what the preterite and the imperfect are. This is if you already kind of have an idea and you just want to practice it. So she entered the room and everyone was talking. So entrar is to enter, and to speak or to talk is hablar. So take your guess, you can pause the video. How would you conjugate entrar and how would you conjugate hablar? So the answer would be that entrar is going to be in the preterite and hablar is going to be in the imperfect. Ella entró, this is the preterite conjugation, en la sala, y todos hablaban. She entered the room, ella entró, and it's preterite for the completed action, right? So my way of thinking about the preterite, this is what I tell my students. I like to give one simple rule that might not apply 100% of the time, which is typically the case in languages. You're never going to have a rule that's like 100% foolproof. There's almost always an exception. But this one is pretty solid. So if you're saying something that's completed in the past, last weekend I went to some restaurant, that would be the preterite. So it's like a specific event. That's what I like to think of it as, a specific event that you can that's like a closed, finished event, versus the imperfect is more of like a general past action that doesn't have a specific start and end. It's not like a specific moment, which the preterite is. So in this case, she entered the room. The specific moment of her entering is the preterite. That's why it's the preterite. Versus everyone was talking. That's like everyone was talking. Whenever you see was talking, so was and then an ing verb, it's going to be the imperfect. Just because, like I said, it's not a specific moment. Everyone was talking throughout the party, not at a specific moment in the party. Whereas the entering the room, actually I don't even know why I'm talking about a party. I'm just assuming it's a party. But her entering the room is a specific moment, so that's why it's ella entró en la sala y todos hablaban. And by the way, let me just pull something up here. This is a good resource to have on you while you're going through any sort of exercise, is SpanishDictionary.com. It's Spanish DICT. Type in whatever verb you need. So in this case, entrar. Go into the conjugations and then check the preterite. So it was she entered. So we can go here, she, ella, right? And go to the preterite, entró. And then you can highlight it or hover over it, and there's an example. So yeah, it's a good resource to use. Next one, we always went out to eat on Sundays. So another thing that I should mention about the imperfect is that it's for like general, habitual, repeated past actions. Something like we used to, we would always, whatever. So in this case, we always went out to eat. That always is kind of your indicator that it's not a specific moment. It's not we went out to eat last Sunday, in which case it would be, because the verb to go out is salir in the preterite. Let me pull up Spanish Dictionary again. Salir in the preterite would be salimos, versus salir in the imperfect is salíamos. So which one would it be? Salimos a comer los domingos, or siempre salíamos a comer los domingos. It would be siempre salíamos a comer los domingos, which is the imperfect. Salíamos. Because it's a repeated habitual action. Next one. She felt sick, so she went to the doctor. So if we check the answer, ella se sentía mal, así que fue al médico. So this is one of those where it's a combination of both. And the first one is in the imperfect. She felt sick, so she went to the doctor. Now this one might be confusing for you. You might be like, wait, her feeling sick, isn't that a specific moment? But you can think about it as like she was feeling sick. And remember what I said earlier? When it's was and then a verb with the ing form, it's the imperfect. So you could think of it as she was feeling sick, because we don't have a specific moment where she felt sick. We're not saying last Monday she felt sick. We're saying she was feeling sick in general. We're giving background. That's another way a lot of teachers like to introduce the imperfect, is like when you're giving background. I never really resonated with that, but maybe that resonates with you. But yeah, she was feeling sick, so she went to the doctor. It wouldn't make sense to say, so the verb ir in the imperfect is iba. Ir. It's very irregular in the preterite. The preterite has a lot of irregular verbs, so that's why in the preterite it's fue. Ella fue. Ella fue. But the reason it wouldn't make sense to say ella iba al doctor, al médico, because that's like saying she used to go to the doctor rather than she went to the doctor. Right? Because the imperfect is for, like or like she was going to the doctor. That doesn't really make sense. It's she went. So it's, even though we don't know the specific moment when she went, that's the implication. She went to the doctor. She was feeling bad, imperfect. She went to the doctor. Right? Because if it was ella iba al médico, it's like we're saying she always used to go to the doctor, which we're not trying to say. We're also not trying to say that she always felt sick. Okay, always was just me adding a word, but she was feeling sick. That's why it's the imperfect. And it's, don't be frustrated if it doesn't click right away. The more exposure you get, the more this will start to make sense. The more you'll kind of understand the pattern of what I'm saying, which is that the imperfect is for kind of general, was feeling, not a specific moment, versus her when she went to the doctor, that's like a specific moment. It'll just start to click with examples. A lot of people try and just like theory their way into conversational Spanish rather than practice their way into it. And the way I did it was literally this: try and say something from English to Spanish, check the answer, and understand why it's wrong. Or if I got it right, understand why it's right. I met her in 2010. So that's a specific moment. So conocer in the preterite, because we're going to use the preterite. For I, yo, is yo conocí. So it's with ER verbs. In the preterite, it's this I ending, I with an accent. Memorizing these endings is work. It requires effort, but there's nothing I can really give you that'll help you. Is just look at the patterns, practice using them, and you'll memorize them with time. So, yo la conocí en 2010. Preterite because it refers to the specific moment of meeting. We know we met her at that specific moment in 2010. I suddenly remembered his name. Let's do a speed run through here. You can pause at any moment if you need to pause. De repente recordé su nombre. So de repente is how they say suddenly in Spanish, like at once. De repente. I remembered his name. Recordé su nombre. So we're not saying I was remembering his name, which would be recordaba su nombre. We're saying we're saying I remembered his name. That's referring to a specific moment when I suddenly remembered his name. Preterite because it's a specific mental realization. That's a little bit of a roundabout way of explaining it. While I was cooking, my brother cleaned the kitchen. Take a guess, pause the video if you need. So while I was cooking, mientras, while is mientras, yo cocinaba. So it's cocinar is the verb, and it's cocinaba because, again, was and then ing, it's going to be in the imperfect. While I was cooking, mientras yo cocinaba, mi hermana limpió la cocina. The thing is, this is one of those examples where if you did use limpiar in the imperfect, mi hermano limpiaba la cocina, you're saying, in that case, you'd be saying my brother was cleaning the kitchen, which still makes sense. So sometimes you can use both, and all that changes is a slight nuance. So like in this case, you wouldn't have to worry and this is why with the preterite and the imperfect, don't stress too much about getting it wrong. When you're in a conversation, Use whichever one immediately feels right, and then if after you said it you realize, oh, I should have used the preterite instead of the imperfect, then you can correct yourself, but don't try and get it perfect while you're saying it. Just let it out, and then you can revise after you said it. Next one, he used to wake up early every day, so used to is a key indicator that it's, well, take a guess. So and then this one's tough because it's a reflexive verb. So if you don't know reflexive verbs, I'm not going to give a whole lesson on it right now because that's not the point of this video. But they're going to have this reflexive pronoun in the infinitive. So it's se. When you conjugate it, depending on who it is, if it's yo, it would be yo, me, and then verb, the verb conjugated for yo. If it was tú, it would be tú, te. If it was él or ella, it would be él se. In this case, it's él se despertaba. It's the imperfect because it's a habitual past action. He used to wake up early every day. Él se despertaba temprano todos los días. So reflexive verbs, that's a whole other concept, so I won't go into that. And let's do one more. I studied all night and finished the project. So I would go with the imperfect and then the preterite. So that's not the correct answer. As you can tell, it's estudié, which is the preterite for both. Estudié and terminé, because both actions are completed. The reason why I said I would use the imperfect is because the context that I was imagining was I was studying all night and finished the project. So you can see how you can use both in some cases. All that changes is a very delicate nuance that even a native speaker wouldn't be able to tell you the difference. And I'm telling you that from personal experience because I've asked many times in conversation to native speakers, just because of my curiosity. I'm annoying. I'll ask the native speaker, if I were to have said estudiaba instead of estudié, would there be a difference? And they'd be like, no, it's basically the same thing. I can't tell you what the difference is. So, moral of the story, try and learn the conjugations. Try and understand the obvious ones where it's I used to is always going to be the imperfect. I was whatevering is always going to be the imperfect. And if it's a completed thing last weekend, in 2010, in whatever, a specific moment, it'll be the preterite. In certain cases like this, it really depends on what you as a speaker are trying to get at. If you're trying to say, I studied, anyways, whatever. I don't want to go into too much confusion. I want to end the video on this note. The most confusing thing about the preterite versus the imperfect is the word was. I was, whatever, the party was fun. The reason why was is so tough is because it's the verb to be in the past tense, and you probably already know that in Spanish there's ser and estar. Ser is to be, estar is to be. Two different forms of to be. That's a whole other video. I'm not going to jump into that. But because there's two forms of to be and there's two past tenses, that gives you 4 ways of saying was. So in English, when we would say was, the party was fun, in Spanish you have to calculate, is it fue, which is ser in the preterite? Is it era, which is ser in the imperfect? Is it estaba, which is estar in the imperfect? Or is it estuvo, which is estar in the preterite? And to be completely honest with you, the way that I learned it was I just said, I don't really care, because I'll be understood anyways. It does change the nuance. You can go through this and check and see how there's a different nuance. But the whole point of my channel is to help you actually be able to have conversations, not to necessarily help you be perfect, because I myself am not 100% perfect with my Spanish. Do I want to be? Sure. Sometimes it bothers me that I get little mistakes like this. I want to have the perfect nuances and everything. But at the end of the day, I've already achieved my goal of being able to have conversations comfortably in Spanish. And that doesn't mean that there's not more room for improvement. Of course there is. But you guys are on this channel watching these videos, not just mine, other people's, doing what you're doing with the apps and whatever else, to have conversations. That's your goal. There's very few of you who are learning Spanish who are trying to become 100% perfect for whatever reason. You probably just want to be able to speak it and understand it and have conversations. So mindsets like this of identifying when something just isn't really worth your time to really dig into and just letting it go to the side, as hard as it is and as frustrating as it is to be left with the confusion, it's better for you to be that way. Anyways, I'm going to sign off now. Hopefully I didn't rack your brain too much. and I will see you in the next video.